Now 4:38 p.m. The Finance Committee has been called to order. First item is acceptance of minutes from the council meeting. There are none. The next item is PCR 78. The next item is PCR 7819, a resolution relative to transfers, supplemental appropriations, and emergency appropriations. I need a motion to hold until June 17th.
Motion to hold to June 17.
Seconded.
We have a motion to hold. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Next, excuse me. Yes. Thank you. Item number PCR 7919, a resolution adopting and setting the tax rate of the City of Warwick for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2019, ending June 30th. I need a motion to move to the floor favorable.
Motion to move to the floor favorable.
Seconded.
We have a motion to move to the floor favorable for
Discussion.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. The Finance Committee is adjourned at 4:40.
Excuse me, I just want to make a quick announcement that we're not sitting around for no reason. Our attorney got tied up with another hearing, but he should be here shortly. pictures, and we'll talk about that too. City Council will come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Marola?
Here.
Mr. Corley? Mr. Howe?
Here.
Mr. Lattiser?
Here.
Mr. McAllister? Here. Mr. McElroy?
Here.
Mr. Briggs?
Here.
Mr. Neri? Ms. Travis? Here. And present.
Councilman Lattiser, if you could lead us in the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. If everybody could be seated. We're here tonight. This is our third night of budget meetings. And on Tuesday and Wednesday, I think we were here for about 8 hours till midnight, almost each night. So the first item on the agenda is PCR 7819, a resolution relative to transfers, supplemental appropriations, and emergency appropriations. Committee report, Finance,
Hold June 17th.
held till June 17th. Second item on the agenda is PCR 7919, a resolution adopting and setting the tax rate of the City of Warwick for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2019, and ending June 30, 2020. Committee report, Finance.
Committee recommended move to the floor for favorable for discussion.
Moved, seconded by Councilman McAllister, Councilwoman Travis, Councilman Howe. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Stands open. I'll call on Councilman Lattiser. Are there any amendments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I will proceed with the following amendments. First item, excuse me, account number 46-365, after-school programs, a reduction of $8,000. The department requested budget was overstated in error.
Sure. Could you repeat that for the
Item, account number 46-365, after-school programs, a reduction of $8,000, and the reason was the department request was overstated in the budget in error.
So is there a second on that motion? Councilwoman Travis, Councilman McAllister, Councilman Howe. Any discussion on that amendment? If not, the clerk will call the roll on the amendment. A yes is for the amendment.
Mr. Corolla?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Nine yes, the amendment stands passed. Councilman Lattiser.
Mr. President, as a point of clarification, do you want to entertain an amendment for moving that money
Not
at
yet.
this time?
No.
Okay. So, next item, 3201, office supplies. It's a reduction of $6,291, and the reason is it was overstated due to a compliance issue with the advertisement.
Okay. Is there an amendment on that? A second on that? Councilman McAllister, Councilman Howe. Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll. A yes is to amend.
Mr. Corolla?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. McAllister? Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis? Yes.
Amendment stands passed.
The next amendment is 30,
That was, excuse me. Line item was 3201. Go ahead, Councilman
next
Lattiser.
item 30-230, community police, a reduction of $40,000. This was budgeted twice in error.
Okay, seconded by Councilwoman Travis, Councilman McAllister, Councilman Howe. Any discussion on this amendment? If not, the clerk will call the roll. A yes is to amend.
Mr. Corolla?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. McAllister? Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis? Yes.
Amendment stands passed. Councilman Lattiser.
Item 26-340, service contracts, an increase of $975, and the account was reduced by, reducing to $975. The account was reduced to $25 rather than account 26-380. So it's essentially a housekeeping issue.
Okay. Okay, it's line item 26340, service contracts.
$975.
Minus 975 from 1,000.
No. No. The proposed budget was 25, the proposed amended was 975, bringing the adjusted budget to 1,000, but there was a $25 error. So the
Plus.
adjusted budget will be
Correct.
975.
Misspoke. Do we have a second? Councilman McAllister. Councilman Howe. Any discussion on that line item? A yes is to approve the amendment, and the clerk will call a roll. Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
The amendment stands passed. Next item is 26, and that was 26,340?
That was 26,340.
Okay.
Now 26,380, general services, a reduction of $75. That was a typo in this account, should have been budgeted at 1,000.
Seconded by Councilman Howard, Councilman McAllister. Any discussion on this amendment? If not, a yes is to approve, and the clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Corolla?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. McAllister?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Snappy? Ms. Travis? Yes.
Amendment stands passed.
Mr. President?
Yes.
A point of clarification, I read off the wrong line as far as the reason.
Okay.
The account was reduced to $25 rather than account 26,380, so it's another housekeeping issue.
Okay.
64,239, supplies miscellaneous, that is a reduction of $10,000.
Do I have a second? Councilman McAllister, Councilman Howe. Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll. A yes is to approve the reduction of 10,000.
Mr. Corolla?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Lattiser?
Yes.
Mr. McAllister? Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Snappy? Ms. Travis? Yes.
Stands passed. Councilman Lattiser.
Item 75-168, dental fire retirees, a reduction of $121,896.
Is that's a reduction in that line item?
Reduction.
A reduction to zero.
Reduction.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Councilman Howe and Councilman McAllister. Any discussion on this line item, a reduction of $121,000? No? If not, the clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Corolla?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Lattiser?
Yes.
Mr. McAllister? Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Snappy? Ms. Travis? Yes.
It stands passed. Councilman Lattiser.
63,290, asphalt, a reduction of $500,000, and that still represents an increase of $110,000 over actual expenses for
Okay.
this year.
So do I have a second? Councilman McAllister, Councilman Howe. I'd like to have a brief discussion on asphalt because I know that was a big debated topic. And I know in the past, only a few years ago, that line item was budgeted at $100,000. This past year, I think we spent around 1.9, projected to spend $2 million by the end of the year. And we also had contributions, contributed support from National Grid, who was doing some paving too. I think it was around $800,000, as I recall. And the issue, I think for all of us, and we had talked about council claims being reduced, is that's one area that was neglected for years and years. I know I at one point was considering a bond referendum because the streets weren't getting paved. And I would ask the former DPW director how long it would take to pave streets using $100,000 a year, and with the number of miles of roads in the city of Warwick, and I think it used to come out to around 150 years. This year, obviously, we didn't get as much paving done as we wanted to. I know that the mayor had suggested 4.5 million. I know we've also talked about the structural deficit in the city of Warwick. Only 2 years ago, the structural deficit in the city under the Avedisian administration was 4.2 million. I personally would like to see that get down to nothing and get back on track. And that's a hard task when you look at the expenses that are before us. Every year I say budgets are not made with one vote in May. A lot of these issues that come before us are fixed costs, which doesn't give the council much flexibility because it's a lot of times a contractual item. But I did listen to many of the members of the public and the council about whether we could actually get 4.5 million spent and compared that to what we have for a structural deficit. And I think it's of utmost importance that we continue to reduce that structural deficit and not rely on reserves. And to some extent, the cuts that we've made so far addresses some of those issues, but taking $500,000 out of this line item and, in my opinion, putting it towards the structural deficit is a wise move as we try and accomplish our goals of repaving streets. If you look at that line item today, if this was to be passed as is, that's 40 times more than we were spending under the Avedisian administration a few years ago. So it's significant. I think everybody saw the amount of roads that were paved last year, and we need to continue to fund this line item and move forward while we address the structural deficit. Is there any other comments on this issue?
I do.
Yes, Councilman Qualley.
Since the time I was elected in Governor Francis Farm, we have been in a construction zone because of the Governor Francis Phase 3 sewer installation. And any asphalt that was in the budget for the past year has not been used at all in Ward 1 because there is going to be new roads that are going to come with the sewer installment. I understand that. I also understand that the Warwick Sewer Authority is passing the cost of the asphalt on to the people within the Governor Francis Phase 3 project, and I have heard at various meetings from the Warwick Sewer Authority that they have historically always passed 100% of this cost on to the consumers. I don't know how accurate that is, and I know that the people of Governor Francis are not very happy about that, but none of the money that we had of the almost the 1.9 million that is spent this year has been in Ward 1. Next year, I would hope that Ward 1 would be having some of the roads fixed, because I know the roads, all of the roads that go from Fair Street all the way down to Narragansett Bay are in disrepair, and I've noticed that they're all on an incline that leads all the way down to the water that somehow causes the roads to break apart, and they have not been paved in my memory, and I've been there for 30-something years now. I You know, I feel very badly for the people in Governor Francis Phase 3 because they are receiving a payback period of 20 years when it should be 30 years. They're paying for their own roads. And when we were talking about asphalt, I wanted to bring that up, that I have been trying to fight with the sewer authority concerning this. This is the current situation. I'm not happy with it, and I am hoping that with the new budget, the $4 million is twice as much money as we spent this year, and I hope that everyone will remember Ward 1 when it comes time to start laying asphalt. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Ricks.
I have similar concerns to Councilman Corley, not in the context of sewers and that distribution, but rather of the sorts of problems that I think we've seen throughout the city as a whole. And this has been an ongoing issue for many, many years because the previous administration simply was not making this a priority, and we've all been paying the price. For as many council claims as we've seen come before us, I can only imagine that there must be 100 times more, maybe more than that, at least 100 times more people who have been negatively impacted by the very substandard condition of our roads. Not all of those people would necessarily have a claim. Not all car damage is going to result in a rim going out, or a tire blowing, or as we've seen in some instances, even causing an auto accident due to the condition of roads. It's not always that severe. But when you take a look at the over 80,000 people we have in this city, so many of whom rely on cars, whether they're drivers themselves or children or otherwise passengers, the damage really adds up when it comes to the alignments being knocked out and then wasting gas or otherwise causing the tires to wear out faster. This is an investment that is worth it because it benefits everybody, the vast majority of people here in Warwick who rely on these roads. Now, I'd also just like to state briefly that similar to Councilman Corley, we have had years where Ward 2 did not receive 1 penny for road repaving. In fact, I think it was early in my term, either the first or second year, where not 1 penny went to repaving roads here in Ward 2. That was under the old administration. Under the new administration, we're seeing a lot of progress. We saw many roads that needed paving really badly getting it. But the need is still so great that this kind of investment is absolutely needed. We have heavily trafficked roads that are one layer above another layer of fill, just patched up. We have, in fact, my neighbors are particularly happy with me, or not so happy with me, because literally 3 doors down, part of a dead-end road has literally been transformed into a dirt road. And I recall talking to constituents a half-mile away on a street that has, it's a street that dozens of people live on, and the last time it was repaved was the early 1980s, and it absolutely shows its age. And that's why I'm supportive of the $4 million for road repaving, and it is a citywide issue. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on the line item on the asphalt, the reduction of a $500,000? If not, a yes is to approve the amendment, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Marola?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis? Yes.
The amendment stands passed. Councilman Lattiser.
The next item is 35111, overtime fire 2, a reduction of $375,000, and that will reduce the overtime budget to $3,532,000.
Is there a second? Councilman McAllister, Councilman Howe. I'd like to discuss this line item if we could for a minute.
Sure.
What's that? Yeah, we did have seconds. Yes. This issue also, for many years, has been discussed on the council floor and outside the council floor regarding overtime, and especially many of the situations that have come to our attention over the last year plus 2 years. I know that to date, I believe there's 8 grievances filed against the city of Warwick. I know in this budget, we have $250,000 earmarked for a fire study. I know that the administration put a stop to the sick time issues with regards to contracts that weren't ratified. I know that we're in arbitration on many other issues, and I think our litigation budget reflects that. While we're discussing overtime and a reduction to the overtime budget, I would like to reiterate what was learned when we had our public hearings, which is, I believe, a full complement is it 220?
212.
212. And we're at
189.
189. And we're about 23 firefighters short of a full complement. And the reason that I say that is because there was a big debate on the council floor about what the cost of hiring new firefighters is compared to the cost of overtime. And I think after we listened to that debate, we all agreed that it's actually less expensive to pay overtime than to hire new firefighters. This is not an enviable position to be in. I know many council members don't appreciate it. Many council members that were on the council when contracts came before us that were ratified, we learned later on that amendments were made without our knowledge. We don't need to talk more about that because it's been all over the press about that. This whole situation has been outrageous to me, and I know my fellow council members. The fire department, as far as quality of service, I think is the best of the state of Rhode Island. It has the newest equipment. It has the newest fire stations. It lacks for nothing. And what we receive in return is problem after problem after problem. And it appears to this council member that whatever we do is not appreciated and not reciprocated. And it's infuriating. And it's infuriating that we have federal investigations. This has to stop. I'm totally in support of $250,000 for a study to look into the fire department. I was in support of the computer program that was recently implemented to prevent these paper sheets from going out. Last time I checked, we were in the 21st century, and I'm learning the fire department is still using paper sheets to track time and overtime and sick time, and there were no accounting standards. And I know that members of the public had asked for that too. So I'm hopeful that we can all move in the right direction together. And I'm also understanding of the fact that if we can't, we're ready to move on our own. And I think you can see that in the legal budget, and I think you can see that with this $250,000 for the fire study and the implementation of new computer systems. At the same time, you want to be realistic as to what overtime's going to be if you're not going to hire firefighters. But sometimes when the devil is in the details, people don't understand the big picture. I've kind of clarified how we all feel on this council about the big picture. I know I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. I don't think the administration is either. And we're moving in the right direction, and certainly we're putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to moving us in the right direction. This is going to stop, and stop now. With that said, are there any other council members that would like to speak on the reduction on the overtime? If not, a yes is to approve, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Marola?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson? Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis? Yes.
The amendment stands passed. Councilman Lattiser.
Mr. President, the last item is 03690. Excuse me, it's the fund drawdown balance. And just want to point out a few things.
If you could make the amendment, get a second,
Okay,
and then...
the amendment will be to reduce it by $1,060,287.
Do I have a second to reduce the fund drawdown by $1,060,287? Seconded by Councilman Howe, Councilman McElroy, Councilman Corley. Go ahead, Councilman Lattiser.
Mr. President, initially, the proposed budget on this item for the drawdown was $3.5 million. Several years ago, the previous administration's drawdown was, I believe, $4.2 million. In the following year, it was $3.8 million. Today, we're sitting here in a much better position than we have been in many years, because the drawdown is now $2,439,713. And I'm not making light of the number. What's important to realize is that we have changed directions. We are moving in a positive direction. And this is a pretty significant issue for all of us that serve on the city council, as well as everyone that pays the bills and pays the taxes. There was a lot of hard work put into this budget, There was a lot of cooperation, certainly a lot of thought process that went into it. And there's always room for something to be a little better. But I think what we have here is certainly far better than what we've had in many, many years. So, having said that, I would ask for favorable action on this particular item.
Thank you. Councilman Qualley.
The question that I have is the line item 03-690. In looking through our book, I looked at page number 1. There is a fund balance drawdown. It doesn't have the account number, but that is the same fund that we're talking about, the one that's on page 1 that does not have the account numbers underneath the executive and administration part of our booklet. Understand. Is my question clear?
Yep, we're just looking at that quick.
Okay, Mr. President, if I may,
Yes.
Councilman Qualley, you're talking on fiscal year 2020 budget. You're talking
Yes.
the fund drawdown balance in that bottom column.
Yes.
That's 3.5 million. That is the one.
Right here. Yep, I get it. Okay.
It's on page 1.
Yes.
It's on page 1 in the general fund.
I have it. I would,
Table 1.
yes.
And that number in your third column from the right, bottom line, fund balance drawdown, 3.5 million, that is the number we're referring to.
We are in, I'm clear on that now.
Brian, you want to clarify that number?
Go ahead, Brian, and you gotta turn that on.
If you flip to page 83 of the budget, this is within the revenue portion of the budget. That line item 100-03690 is fund balance drawdown. It's listed as a revenue account. It's on page 83, towards the bottom.
Thank you.
You gotta use your mic. Yeah, line, yeah. So, I think the important point here is that 2 years ago, the structural deficit was 4.2 million. This year, it's 2.4. Being able to knock it down almost $2 million is significant. I would personally like to see that come down even more. The question is, many variables that I think we'll discuss after this amendment as to what's reasonable and what isn't, considering the number of variables that we've talked about briefly, including the fire department variables, including being in interest arbitration and having 8 grievances filed against us. But with that said, are there any other questions on reducing the structural deficit by over $1 million? And almost $2 million from the year before that? If not, a yes is to approve, and the clerk will call a roll. Yes.
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 Okay. Amendment stands passed. If someone could move it as amended?
Move as amended 100-03-690.
Yeah, that's what he did.
I'm sorry, the entire.
Yeah, you moved it. So the motion is to move the budget
Entire
as
budget
amended,
as
as amended, and it's seconded by Councilman Howe, Councilman McAllister. Now, any discussion on the entire budget? Councilman Sinapi.
So just briefly, regarding the school department, and the fact that it's obvious that we're not giving any increase to them other than what was proposed in the budget, I'm obviously not happy about that. For those who don't know, I have a son who's in the school department, and I, like probably many, can't afford to send my son to private school. I need the Warwick school system to work, and my son does too. That being said, I know I can't speak for the rest of the council, but I know I'm put in a difficult position when the school department's representative, Mr. Ferrucci, refuses to contest over $3.5 million of allegedly over-budgeted funds, despite an explicit request from our council president to address them, given that concern that they appeared in the 2020 fiscal year budget. The increased state aid, the increased offer from the proposed budget from the mayor, and then added in the comparison to Cranston, the bigger school system, more kids, more teachers, and more schools, and yet they have a budget of $163 million roughly as compared to our proposed $174 million. In my view, that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way our school system is. The good news is I think the current school committee, within probably between next year when we sit here, I think we'll be having a very different discussion, because they've already started making the strides to fix it. I saw them go line by line through their budget. I saw them do things that some of the administration didn't necessarily like, because it took away their stuff, but it gave more transparency. I think by the time we sit here next year, there'll be enough faith and confidence where we won't have this issue. And in fact, I think they'll be asking for less money, because they won't need it, because they'll have fixed that which needs to be fixed. Our school system is in dire need of change, and I think they'll get it done. If the city had enough money, I'm sure we'd be able to give them more, but we don't have it. For those of us who sat through the budget meetings, we asked every department, those are non-contractual raises? No, always contractual every time. This budget was already trimmed pretty extensely before we even saw it. There's not enough to move around, especially not for $7.5 million, unfortunately. So, while I'm not terribly pleased that we can't give the schools money, I understand. Unfortunately, it makes sense fiscally. It's just disappointing, and I'm sure other members feel the same, but we don't have someone giving us numbers from the school department that we can trust, unfortunately. And without that, it's difficult to make strides.
Just to follow up, Councilman Sinapi, you know, in this budget, and I know we haven't talked about schools, but we've added $1.75 million because we've taken over debt service. So that's a check that we have to write. And we just gave them $6 million for bonds. I know that the state is increasing state aid to the schools. And as you pointed out, I think the numbers were around $19,200 per student in Warwick and $15,000 in Cranston. So I don't know that it's a revenue problem. The most frustrating issue for me last year was I was kind of in your situation debating the merits of additional aid to the schools. And we had a discussion among all the council members, and we did, as we've done this year, gave them $1.5 million more. And what happened was, we ended up in litigation. I realized it was another school committee. We ended up getting sued for the first time I can ever remember on a Carullo action. I can remember Mr. Ferrucci standing right there and saying, we need not a penny less than $8 million. As you know, the maximum that we can raise with a tax increase is just a little over $8 million. And then the coup de grace was that parents, teachers, friends, staff were told that their bathrooms would get cleaned every other day. And we saw an increase in sicknesses, and we saw an increase in illnesses, and we saw our phones light up, and we were told that we didn't give the school department enough money. And then I can't tell you how much time I spent, Councilman Lattisaw, other members of the council, the administration, the mayor, in negotiations in the fall, and then eventually mediation in the spring. And for the first time after we were sued, we were required to hire an attorney. We were required to hire experts. And the CPAs go in and they find that for the last several years, one issue was that they had been overfunding their pensions above the annual required contribution by $4.2 million. And in the year that we're negotiating, and in the year that they cut the mentorship program, in the year that they're not cleaning the bathrooms every day, they're adding $800,000 over the annual required contribution. The annual required contribution is between 1 and 1.2. And to listen to a certain individual, and I don't need to point fingers and names, tell us in the mediation room that they were proud of overfunding their pensions more than what was required by the actuaries, while they were not washing bathrooms, and while they took away money from the mentorship program, was infuriating. It was infuriating. We didn't even get into the other issues on the list that the accountant had identified: not reporting revenue, having, for example, $150,000 in textbook money sitting in an account with 2 months left. We all know you're probably not going to buy new textbooks for the kids with 2 months left in school. And these were reasonable questions where the accountant looked at these issues over the trend of 9 months and projected out through June, and we all know that June is half a month, but he projected out June as if it was a full month of spending. And April, he looked at also, and April had a week's worth of vacation, but he treated it as if April was a full month also. And he came up with about $3.5 million of expenditures that were not going to be made. It was going to be a surplus. Not only did we ask about it in the mediation over a month ago, I asked Tuesday night for the school department to specifically respond, and I don't need to go through those line items again, but I went through them that night. And I said, I don't want to interrupt your presentation, but please give me your response as to what's going to happen in these line items at the end of the year. It was like none of us were here. It was silence. Nobody bothered to answer. I would expect an answer to all of those questions. I didn't get an answer to one. And then they argue that they need $7.4 million, and you point out $3.5 million in surplus, and I didn't hear the courtesy of one response. And that's for this year's budget. You can imagine that, I would assume those line items would have a similar trend in the next year. And then we go into their budget for next year and what the cost would be. One issue that popped out was the fact that they claimed that healthcare would have no surplus this year. That wasn't in the 3.5 that we talked about. Traditionally, they have posted a surplus in their healthcare account. When I asked about that question, I got an answer of 1.7 deficit, then it went to 2 million, then it went to 1.6, then I asked, will you have a deficit in healthcare this year? And the answer was, I don't know. It makes it very difficult for this council to project the needs of the school department when you have an outside third party come back after you're told $8 million and not a penny less, and an objective third party, who, by the way, was an attorney for the school department in the past, the famous Rogusta report we all remember, says you don't need a dime more. And then you look at the objective figures of $19,200 spend per kid. I think Councilman Sinapi raised the issue that Hendricken was $15,000 a year. And Cranston's running around $15,000 a year. And you look at that and you say, what are we doing wrong? We can't tell them how to spend money. We can't tell people that it's common sense that you have to wash bathrooms every day. We can't tell people that it's common sense to use a mentor program for $100,000 that gives you so many volunteers. You can't tell them how to spend their money. And it's frustrating from my perspective because I'm an advocate of education. I want the best education. I'm a product of the Warwick schools. But just give us a straight answer when we ask for it. We shouldn't have to hire experts to figure out if we're right or not. When you give us the numbers, give us the numbers. And, for the first time in a long time, I agree with the rest of the council on this and the administration. I think 1.75 this year with, I think, another $500,000 from the state, and then there's talk about additional state aid on top of that, plus an additional $6 million for bonds for renovations of the schools. When we can raise $8 million in a tax increase, I don't know what else we're supposed to do. I'm baffled. So I understand what their ask was last year. I understand what their ask is this year, and I understand the numbers that I just read off to you. But that's this council member's opinion on the schools, and I would just like to point out one other issue, that in this year's budget, they're projecting an increase in healthcare expenditures of 21%. 21%. And they need an additional over $3 million for healthcare. I haven't seen that. In all my years in the council, I've never seen that expenditure. Be interesting what happens when we come back next year if that prediction of 21% was true. And if it's not true, there's an additional $2 million worth of savings if you go up 800,000 or $1 million. And I had the same response that I did in mediation when I was told that it was a wise move to overfund pension plans. And I said, okay. I said, what'd you base that on? Well, what I heard. And I asked the gentleman, are you an actuary? No. Do you have an actuary report? No. And in healthcare, do you have a healthcare report saying it's going up 21%? No, just my opinion. I don't know how you gauge the veracity of the statements. I'm not an actuary. I'm not a healthcare consultant. We're going to have healthcare come up on Monday night. One of the healthcare bids is saying that we might save $1 million over what we spent this year. How's one side of the city may stay the same or go down $1 million, but the other side of the city is predicting a 21% increase? And I think it might be the same company that we're using to provide the healthcare services. There's an old saying, you don't know where you're going, you don't know where you're going to end up, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And I just look at this school budget and I feel for the new school committee members. You can imagine how we feel here on the council, because when people stand in front of us that represent the department and we get the answers that I just articulated, it's frustrating. Very, very frustrating. And I look at what I did last year and what this council did last year and gave more money, and the response was, we're not going to wash your kids' bathrooms. So what do? We give them more money this year, and they're not going to wash the kids' bathrooms? I don't know. We're giving them 1.75, $6 million in bonds. The state's giving them an additional $500,000, and then on top of that, the state might give them more money. I'm comfortable with where we are, and I'll assume that we'll see what transpires over the next few months. But are there any other comments on the school department? Yes, Councilman Ricks.
As I look at the budget, as I was listening to the presentation of the finance director, I had many of the same concerns as my colleagues. Looking at a 21% increase on the health costs, that's simply not credible. And we have to also look at the past, at the track record here, when last year around this time, I asked that same finance director, you know that it is literally impossible for the city council to come up with the, I believe it was 8.1 million to fulfill that ask. I don't see how that is possible, given the limits with the maximum tax increase and the other obligations that the city had. What can we do? What's the real number to run the schools? And some people call that questioning rude. But then, over the course of the last year, by the time mediation rolled around, that number was nearly chopped in half. And not all of that savings came from cuts to truly essential programs. There was a lot of room left in that budget. And then we hear about the CPAs looking into, outside CPAs hired by the city, looking into the budget and finding that additional $3.5 million. And ultimately, the mediator found that the school department could resolve the budget issues without the city contributing any additional money. And so the $8 million suddenly became $0. Now, Some people thought that when I asked about that 8.1 million, that it was rude. Well, I think it's a bigger problem when we have a director who is coming in front of this body and saying that they need millions of dollars more than what is actually needed. That impacts the city as a whole, certainly city government, as well as the taxpayers. I also wanted to state that a couple of years ago, I first began to have doubts about some of the practices that were going on in that administration because of issues relating to simple safety in those school buildings with the sprinkler systems, alarm systems. The fire alarm systems in two of my two elementary schools, both elementary schools in Ward 2, had either completely or partially failed. And in one of those schools, the school where there was a complete failure, the teachers were not informed. And I followed up with the finance director about what the plan was and how we were exactly how this all happened, what the plan was to fix it, and there were some answers about trying to come up with the money. And as I look back, that was also one of those years that the pension was being funded by hundreds of thousands of dollars over what the actuaries said was needed. So that gives rise to a couple of questions. Why is it that safety is, or at least was in the past, I have confidence in the new school committee that safety will no longer be given a lower priority than, well, unnecessary contributions. I'm confident in the new school committee, both our ability to work with them, their diligence, and their values, that they care about the students and prioritizing safety. And it's a sad state of things that I can't say that for, certain folks whose actions were inconsistent with those values. But ultimately, looking at the budget, to sum up what my thoughts on what the council president explained better than I, we know that the school department has some needs that are growing. They have contractual raises that are a bit over $4 million. We know that healthcare costs are probably, we can expect them to also be going up. However, we have our doubts that they're going up by 21%. That's simply not realistic. So we have to look at the numbers that we do have, the best information that we do have at this point, saying that the needs are growing in some respects, but the CPAs have also identified at least $3.5 million that can be cut. And then, in addition to that $3.5 million, we're looking at the city taking over $1.75 million approximately in the principal and interest, as well as passing along $500,000 in the housing aid, which brings the total to about $2.25 million. On top of that, otherwise, the state aid in increasing the percent of reimbursement from 36% to 38% reflects approximately an additional $1.8 million. And when you look at the balance of the numbers, I'm confident that the city council is doing the right thing at this time to make sure that the schools do have the resources that they need, and I'm confident that we can, as a body, work with our colleagues on the school committee going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Councilman Sinapi.
Yeah, and just to be clear, in case I don't want to get misinterpreted, I think the council is doing the best it can, given the information or lack thereof that we're getting from their budget officer for the school department. And it's frustrating to be in this position because, I mean, according to that budget officer, we're going to underfund them by $7.5 million, right? And yet, according to people who are actually credible, that's not true. So I think our hands are somewhat tied, given the current circumstances. But again, I am confident the new school committee will take action, clean house, and by next year we'll be in a very different atmosphere, and the school department will be revamped and likely spending far less than they are now. And I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. So the budget's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? If not, a yes is to approve the budget, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Marola?
Yes.
Mr. Corley?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Ladson?
Yes.
Mr. McAllister? Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
Yes.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis? Yes.
Stands passed. Can I have a motion?
Make a motion for a 5-minute recess to let the finance director...
No, we're good. We're good. We don't need the finance director. Just a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes. A second, seconded by Councilman Howe. All in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Council stands adjourned.